this video is gonna be a review of media that features a lot of illustrated and special effect gore. I'll be censoring all of it, but viewer discretion is advised. Fist of the North Star is a 1983 ultra-violent manga series written by Buronson and illustrated by Tetsuo Hara. It follows a super buff martial artist named Kenshiro, surviving in a post-apocalyptic world devastated by nuclear warfare. Master of the martial art Hokuto Shinken, Kenshiro is able to strike and manipulate his foes' pressure points, to make them explode in over-the-top fashion. It's not like he does this for no reason either. The world is full of ruffians and general evildoers, and Kenshiro becomes a beacon of hope for the remaining people of the world. Initially starting with a single-volume story about him trying to rescue his lost love from a rival named Shin, the story grew in scope as Kenshiro encountered more friends, relatives, and villains with increasingly more ridiculous martial art techniques to combat his own. Certain aspects of it have aged poorly. By being a shonen battle manga, it has a lot of repetition, and I've purposely avoided reading the second half because I hear it's not great. But I have a massive amount of respect for it, and the legacy it left behind. Its stylistic and visual influences on works like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure shouldn't be ignored. I like many of its characters. It's not afraid to show its male leads being emotionally vulnerable, and the artwork throughout is beautifully illustrated. Kenshiro may be a tad overpowered for the manga's own good. You can make it a drinking game with how many super powerful techniques he seems to have, but it's also just gratifying to see a guy beat up objectively evil people.
Hokuto!
Playing the game developed by the Yakuza devs, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, was what got me thinking about this series again. And eventually my mind wandered to its 1995 live-action American adaptation.
You're already dead.
Yeah, starting to remember why I forgot it in the first place. See, the 80s was around the time Japanese media began to make its way to the United States in droves, thanks to the proliferation of VHS tapes, physical manga releases, and heavily edited releases like Robotech. Fist of the North Star had its manga published here for a brief window, and the 1986 anime movie made its way into home video in the West. I'd imagine these two releases were what spurred the creation of the 1995 live-action adaptation. Now, this wasn't a big budget affair. It was sent directly to video, so I didn't have my expectations set very high. I also want to make it clear that, if it wasn't before, I don't think the manga is a masterpiece. I'm not a die-hard fan. I like the source material well enough, but I'm not holding the movie up to a high standard. That said, there's a reason why live-action adaptations of anime have a notoriously bad reputation. And movies like these are why such a reputation exists. The film is a loose retelling of the first volume of the manga. In the post-apocalypse, a man named Kenshiro grapples with his destiny as a successor as the Fist of the North Star. Meanwhile, his rival, a man named Shin, who stole his girlfriend, Julia, has plans to expand his Southern Cross Empire across the world and set up a new world government. After meandering for 50 minutes, Kenshiro eventually decides to confront Shin. Ignoring the fact that a white British guy is playing a character named Kenshiro, I am not opening that can of worms. The film is relatively faithful to the source material. Kenshiro kinda looks like Kenshiro. They've kind of got a jacket. Julia has a little more agency than her manga counterpart. There is a scene where Kenshiro's master appears to him as a zombie.
Fist of the North Star!
I could go and list all the differences from the manga. It definitely doesn't have the same level of violence as the source material, but generally it has all the key plot bits. But a number of confounding elements, like the size of the production, to the acting, to the general filmmaking not being good, is what really doomed this project.
Okay, now you try.
Bug off, kid!
No, really, just anyone can do it.
Now, despite some rather clunky expository narration and most of the first 7 minutes being awkward close-ups of the actors' faces, this film actually has a bit of a semi-promising start. The little sets and matte paintings they made for it aren't that bad. Sure, the dialogue is already kinda dorky.
You mean to kill me?
Yes, I mean to kill you.
But the music is kinda epic. It's promising some big adventure in a low-budget setting. It has the potential to pull it off. Nope, never mind. It's fucking silly. At times, it transcends simply being a bad adaptation, and it just ends up being fucking funny.
Tell me you love me.
I'm sure Gary Daniels is better in other things. He's got plenty of work since this movie and is an accomplished martial artist. But his portrayal of Kenshiro in this movie is not that of a stoic badass and more of a deer in the headlights. He's trying to do this intense stare with his big old blue eyes, and I'm sorry, it's just not intimidating. Most of the acting in this movie is quite bad.
What are you trying to do, tickle me to death?
With some of the village people, I actually get the sense that they were hired for their acting. Shin can be a good ham at points, but Kenshiro is just awful. I think this actor was hired for his martial arts prowess and not his acting capabilities, but even that doesn't properly come across considering how poorly shot this film is. The first sign that this flick was a bad idea is the scene where he beats the thugs outside the house he's staying in. This is the exact moment the film descends into schlock.
Don't turn your back on me!
You're already dead.
The awful dialogue and acting are one thing, but the real kiss of death for this movie is its camera work and editing. Close-ups are used way too often. It'll cut from a medium close-up to a deep close-up all the time, and it contributes to an atmosphere of uncomfortableness. And it's cutting so rapidly at times that it doesn't give the viewer's eyes enough time to breathe before another cut happens. And the next shot is usually some actor's face pressed so close up against the frame. The bad audio mixing with the music blaring over what the characters are saying doesn't help with the comprehension.
Hurt you for as long as I want. All the while, Kenshiro, upstairs.
Not having enough wide shots creates a bad sense of space and makes the entire film feel claustrophobic and tiny. Even outdoor scenes feel small and confined. Pair that with actors whispering sweet nothings at you and it just feels sticky and gross. This extremely tiny look for the film is likely because the sets actually were tiny. But that's not the feeling you want from a movie taking place in a vast post-apocalypse of crumbling ruins and wastelands. It just doesn't work. More shots like this peppered throughout the movie would have really helped establish the space the characters occupy. I don't care if they were embarrassed by their sets. Wide shots are incredibly important, especially in action scenes where you want to know where the characters are standing. They even break the 180-degree rule during the fight with Shin, adding to the disorientation. The best fight scene in the entire movie is this one little scene where Kenshiro enters Shin's tower and faces off against his minions. There are actual quick wide shots here that give a bit more of a dimension to the environment. I can tell Gary Daniels is more than a competent martial artist in this scene, but even then I wouldn't call the actual fight scene anything more than subpar. There are still too many cuts and the camera position never changes from this angle. The film's look is so strange and the vibe is so uncomfortable. It looks like one of those X as an 80s dark fantasy videos. You know, the ones that were being spammed on YouTube a couple weeks ago.
Stop looking at the past!
Don't get me wrong, this film can be corny in the best ways. But for me, what really holds it back from being a true so bad it's good classic is its pacing. The film meanders so much. When something plot-related happens, it's like, wow, okay, I guess we're doing this now. Kenshiro barely seems like he's trying to find Shin. He's too busy having goofy flashbacks to the time he got his scars and receiving visions from his master. He spends a good chunk of the movie training and meditating, so the movie feels aimless for a while as it tries to find a direction to go with its story. There was so much there in that one segment of the manga they were adapting that could have made for a fun little movie, but they just flunked out on the screenplay. The occasional camp that comes from every other element saves this from being a total bore. The makeup effects just don't capture the level of gratuity as the source material either, so it's lacking the same visceral absurdity that made the manga entertaining. I bet that has more to do with censorship, but it's not convincing anyways. Kenshiro's 7 scars look more like extra nipples than scars. An unsourced Wikipedia factoid claims the staff on set called the lead actor Condom Man, which I don't disagree with, that's what they look like. But yeah, it's been nearly 28 years since this movie released. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm mad at it. I like that they genuinely tried with this film. It's just that everyone involved wasn't experienced enough to pull it off. The fact that it can be unintentionally funny at times means that they did believe in what they were making. A lot of the comedy in this was not intentional. It's a mess of a vision, but they did believe in it. The production design is promising but ultimately lackluster. The claustrophobic camera work and cutting do not benefit this film at all. The acting is awful, the dialogue stinks. It's an all-around bad film. It's difficult to even recommend to bad movie fans. Watch the clip of Kenshiro beating up the thugs at the beginning. It's the most embarrassing scene in the film, and it perfectly illustrates its problems. The actors and staff did get more work after this movie, so it's not like this was a dead end for their careers. Hell, Dante Bosco played bad in this movie, and he'd go on to be in a lot of good things. Malcolm McDowell probably got paid too. You'd think an adaptation this bad would prove that anime or manga adaptations are destined to fail, and historically that seems to be the case, but I'd actually like to recommend a movie that set out to do something similar to this, but actually succeeded. You've probably heard of it before. Riki-Oh, The Story of Ricky, is a Hong Kong-produced film that is also based on an absurdly violent manga, and it really delivers.
It's a hard knock life.
Sure, the gore isn't the most convincing, but it's still so over the top that it's genuinely squeamish, in a fun way. I still don't feel comfortable showing it without the demonetization symbol, so it is schlocky in its own way, but it is a genuinely entertaining movie for reasons the filmmakers actually intended. While I'm recommending other things, just reading the original manga is also a decent bet. If you don't have the time, the 1986 Fist of the North Star movie is also good fun, if you can handle the violence of the series being taken up to 11. It takes elements from the first half of the manga and rewrites it to fit a 2-hour film. It's not perfect, but it is a decent consolidation of the story. It looks good, it sounds even better with its phenomenal soundtrack and on-point voice acting. Kenshiro walks through a building, it just fucks, honestly. Another way to get into the series is through Lost Paradise. It's very approachable to newcomers. It also takes elements from the manga and remixes and places them in a different setting. It's made by the developers behind the Yakuza games, and it very much plays like them too, with all the silly minigames and sub-stories. There's even DLC that replaces Kenshiro with Kazuya Kiryu. It's very fitting. They both share the same voice actor. You can especially tell when he says "nani."
Nani? Nani?
You can get it for an obscenely cheap price on the PS4. I highly recommend it. So yeah, you have plenty of other options other than the American adaptation. But yeah, who's ready for the live-action One Piece adaptation? If there's any manga that needs the adaptation, it's the one whose visual identity is really goofy and cartoony. Yeah, that'll translate to live action and not be extremely embarrassing. I will literally bite my tongue if it is a good show. But yeah, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really enjoyed making it. I know it's not something I usually do. I usually don't cover live-action adaptations of anime, but I am a casual fan of the material and thought it would be a nice change of pace from what I usually do. But yeah, now I will read out my top patrons. Kamen, Queer Kaiju, Radiant GV, Waba, Alcoholic Alligators, Ryan Santa Cruz, Avak Robot, The Antagonist, Richard Ciavardon, Ziggy Zigra, It's Goodzy, Big Odilo, An Actual Demetrodon, CMG, Red Comet Harry, and Marpzilla. Thank you very much.